There will be an eclipse.
Okay, yeah. Now we're in the dark.
The theme of the
Your choice is to be blinded or be in the
have
dark.
no light whatsoever.
You are not allowed to see. That's the important part. That might be the,
It's that one over there.
and yep, that'll do it. Is that okay? Yeah. All right. I'm getting the please hold sign.
Please hold.
Okay. Hello, everyone. What's that?
Pretty great atmosphere.
Yeah, we're doing all right. We've got it covered. It's the golden hour here at Wells College, and I'm not introducing anything today. I'm just doing the bureaucratic nonsense, which is to start off every event always by thanking our overlords. They don't want me to call them that. Let's not send them this video. NYSCA, the New York State Council for the Arts, whose funding supports the Visiting Writers Series and all of the public-facing arts programming at Wells. We are very grateful for their support. And this is our final Visiting Writers Series event of the season, of the year. I'm very excited that Kyra Simone is going to be our anchor leg here, but I don't have the honor of introducing her. That goes to my colleague, James Miranda. So, James, come on up.
Ooh, it is nice. I like it. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out. And yeah, it is fitting that you are the anchor to the Visiting Writer Series. We've had 8 writers this year.
Oh, God.
9 writers. 9, right, or something like that. Anyway, the best for last. So I am very excited to introduce Kyra Simone to you tonight. Kyra is coming to us from Brooklyn, where she's the co-editor of Zone Books, which since 1985 has been publishing original works by international scholars of philosophy, history, art history, cultural and sound studies, as well as political and social theory that have changed conversations across disciplines. She is also part of the editorial collective at Ugly Duckling Press, also based in Brooklyn, which started as a zine in the 90s and has since developed into an independent and nonprofit publisher of poetry, translation, performance texts, and books by artists. It has over 400 titles to date, and Kyra gave us a whole rundown on Ugly Duckling Press in her wonderful master class. In addition to all of her editorial work, Kyra is also a singular and fantastic writer. She published her book Palace of Rubble in spring of 2022? Fall of 2022. I was so close. Which I believe she'll be reading from tonight. A collaboration with visual artist John Devola, whose photography accompanies Kyra's writing. Palace of Rubble is a collection of one-page stories composed primarily of single words culled each day from the New York Times, among other news sources, written under constraint in the tradition of Oulipo. These hybrid works of prose are reconstructions that no longer resemble the original text, yet draw from the same reservoir of vocabulary to convey new images and ideas while preserving some distant ember of the universe from which they were first generated. The stories in Palace of Rubble are such beautiful experiences, is what I found reading that book. And whether this is born from kind of the alchemy of constraint, the familiar strangeness or the strange familiarness of the language plucked from the everyday, cut, buffed, set in a new perch, rearranged, it becomes something beautiful and haunting all at once. The voice in these stories feels almost oracular at times, is the word that keeps coming to me. It kind of lulls you, it provokes you, it intimates and keeps you at arm's length at the same time. There are so many images that I find rattling around in the back of my mind from time to time. The spikes of a man's shoes dripping with honey, sooty handprints dirtying the gauze of a skirt, a Greek myth on a burning stage. The voice of some of these works, in its oracularness, which is not a word, it just has a rhythm and a cadence so that the stories start to feel like premonitions, like tea leaves at the bottom of a china cup. They're hard to describe, let's say that. I've also had the kind of treat of having read and heard some of your novel in progress, which is it still called Radiant Cities? Yeah. Radiant Cities, which is like part historical fiction, part kind of like city of the future, city of the past, these imaginary landscapes that are kind of like similarly haunting, but really beautiful, and I'm very excited for that novel to come out at some point soon, hopefully. I also happened to meet Kyra in Kenya at a writer's residency, and so we share the bond of simultaneous intestinal distress. So, which is a bond that can't be broken, I would say. So it's my pleasure to introduce Kyra Simone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, James. That was an amazing introduction. Thanks also to Dan and Mary and Wells in general for inviting me here. It's been really a wonderful couple days. So as James said, I'm going to read from my book, Palace of Rubble, which I talked a little bit about to many of you who were at the masterclass. I guess James gave a pretty good description of it. One other thing I guess I could say is that the kernel of the idea for this book actually came from a class I took in undergrad. It was an innovative fiction class, and one of our assignments was to write a story using all the words we found in our wallets, which is something I had sort of talked a bit about in the class as well. And that idea is what sparked me to try a constraint of my own. And one day in the dining hall, I found an unopened, unread newspaper sitting on one of the tables. And this was in 2003, and it was right during the fall of Baghdad. And there was a picture of one of Saddam Hussein's crumbled palaces. And it was like a white grand piano crumbling in a ballroom. It was a very beautiful picture. And the caption below it said Palace of Rubble. So that's sort of where I got my title and my idea to try writing stories out of words I found in the newspaper. So yeah, that's a little bit of backstory. Being that we're in the aftermath of an eclipse, I'm going to read a few stories from the book. They're all very short, kind of on the theme of celestial cosmic things. So first I'm going to read the title story, which is very brief, called Palace of Rubble. Okay. A breaking wave collapses on the bank before two half-naked women on white Arabian horses. The water moves with a pulse at the edge of the planet. It sucks in invisible creatures and spews them out again over the desert, a sick coast that never fully swallows anything. The truth is, we don't have enough liquor, says the older woman. We were promised jubilation, says the younger one. The two plain Americans are luxuriously undressed, but there is nothing in their pockets and no masterpieces forming in their heads. They've spent the day at the mansion, strewn over staircases that lead nowhere, and men with rifles passing through for a slow dance. The king's piano has died in the ballroom, crumbling like an elephant kneeling down to sleep. The air suggests bald men changing tires dripping with used oil, not roses. One day, these women will huddle inside trailers and teach 6-year-olds how to make barbed wire fences. But today, they will only watch foreign swans on a foreign marsh. The younger woman removes the last piece of cloth remaining on her body and puts on a helmet some soldier has left on the beach. How beautiful it is, shouts the other woman, looking up at her. I love it, the young one sings back, unsure of what she is remarking on. Here is a response like many others, immediate and makeshift. For the first time, they stop counting the days and wonder if they will grow old in this scorching, isolated, windowless place. The world is a widening palace of ruined freedom, but here at least there are no happy crowds to puff at in the dust. That's that one. This next story is called Today Clouds. Like other places, there are areas of fog and sometimes a little turmoil in the market. The buildings are old. Doors creak on their hinges. Accidents happen in the spring. Kings break their hips while elephant hunting as fortunes spin from the wheels of young maidens. In the afternoon, 2 children play outside an abandoned house. Their dolls long decapitated, they arrange pieces of trash on the sidewalk, constructing their own tiny world on the ground, its territories already mapped out by the fading chalk outlines of missing people. Here, a blank square of sidewalk becomes an open field, an empty pastry bag, a great white mansion. All is in miniature, inanimate specks fading into a voluminous backdrop of orange sky. The children drag sticks along the pavement, as if marching drones through the little town they've imagined, past the monuments of discarded bottles and shards of glass. They control everything, down to the weather, pouring water over the town for days of flooding, tilting magnifying glasses over rooftops to zap out unworthy citizens. Still in all, it has been a day for rookies, a day for running amok. Just off a main highway that stretches east of them and slices through a moonscape of craggy slopes, teenagers play with guns in the idle mountains, dropouts, fulfilling a century-old dream of taking to the hills. Many of them live in the trailers dotting the hillside, where they spend their nights studying video game ninjas. Inside the abandoned house, a substitute teacher tries to adjust to daylight saving time. His kitchen is full of substitute ingredients: honey instead of sugar, water instead of milk, a single plank of wood where the bed should be, made for a man in place of another. He scrawls out a lesson plan for his next day of work, in which the few students he has left will be asked to contemplate one question: where does inspiration originate? The substitute looks up at the tiny cracks of light flickering like stars through the boards nailed over the windows. He remembers staring into a lamp store in Chinatown once, a gallery of lights all blinking in dissonant rays of color. But here there is nothing but scrub brush for miles into the distance, as if some enterprising tycoon has made off with the rest. The weather vane on the roof turns slowly on chicken feet. As he peers through that same point of light in the window, thoughts shattered by the dropout boys shooting their guns into the air. A gust of wind blows a fleet of plastic bags past the house. Today, clouds, says one of the children outside, cueing the orchestra for the next great calamity. That's the end of that one. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. Okay, so this next story was, the words I used in it were pulled from an article that was actually in the obituary section, and it was the obituary of the woman who wrote the Dear Abby column, and her real name was Pauline. So this is called Dear Pauline. She sits on a metal folding chair on the roof, smoking in her slip, a magnificent creature, with short black hair slicked back away from her face, and a pair of neat pearls nestled in her earlobes. An old television flickers on a crooked patch of the roof, plugged into a long cord cast out from an open window. The woman watches it as she smokes, reading the title cards that appear between the images, sensational white lettering against the black backdrop of a silent picture. Earlier in the day, she sat by the window, gazing out at the backsides of the surrounding buildings, a jungle of wrecked yards, scattered with brick. She watched the rain fall on a white mattress abandoned in a parking lot, there for weeks, along with a pair of shoes thrown out on the asphalt and the kids dangling from the fire escapes, using them as basketball hoops. Tart-tongued and handsome, she has been answering letters all afternoon, trying to escape the weepy Victorian past by advising lonely hearts to leave their rooms, housewives to abandon their cards at the table. Her own husband wrote a letter to the paper once himself, telling of how she eats breakfast naked and cooks naked and routinely falls asleep early in the evening, still in the buff. He often stays up late, catching sight of strange things that only happen at this hour, like the men digging in the yard in the middle of the night. She can hear him typing away as she falls asleep, both of them just silhouettes to each other on either side of the curtain, hanging between the adjoining rooms. But tonight, she has kept herself up to see the eclipse, a rare blood moon that is said to rise at midnight, casting a dim red light over the city. She hasn't been on the roof in months, not since her 30th birthday, when she stood with a crown of white roses wilting from her head as cockroaches ran across the tarred ridges. It was only November then, and as they raised their glasses, the first snow began to fall, a gentle flurry that felt fine against their skin. It has been a long winter, followed by a dark spring. Hungry rats have gnawed at the bark of trees. Houseplants have frozen in blocks of ice. The cold days have been spent conversing with the paintings along the hall, pictures of marauders waiting in the dark to have their way with her. A century ago, no one had ever seen a moon like this. But now, as the tables are set with unleavened bread, the doors marked with simulated lamb's blood, it appears in the sky, burnt orange red, sliding into the Earth's shadow and shining with the light of every sunrise and sunset that has occurred across the planet through the day. Off the coast of an eastern country, a boat full of school children disappears into the sea. A plane goes missing in the Australian Ocean. A hot air balloon goes down in flames just after it takes off. The people on the roof remove their clothes and begin to dance, the man having emerged from the window that leads back into the apartment, looking up at the light bleeding from the edges of the moon. In the middle of Metropolis, there was a strange house, overlooked by the centuries, say the words across the screen. When the color is gone from the sky, what is left appears black. Okay, that was the eclipse story. So some of these stories are sort of about, I say stories, but they could easily be prose poems. Some of them are sort of about apocalyptic landscapes, and some of them are sort of more about being in relationships. And I guess the joke sort of is that maybe those two things aren't that different. So kind of giving you a few of each. This next one is called Blue Moon. The encounter is always breathtakingly brief. Young and alone, they ride to the border on the roofs of freight trains or the backs of buses. They cross the river on inner tubes or hike for days through extremes of heat and chill in the deserts. Death comes as a surprise to many, to quiet men with the hearts of engineers, to doctors with secrets of the world's demise, to the unexpected surge of children who travel here without parents, as if hoping to arrive at the sea of tranquility. A storm threatens the last stretch of railroad, winding through mountains of hazardous waste as it approaches the damsel tied to the tracks. There she lies, having survived a summer of flitting through narrow corridors, waiting limp-wristed in greenhouses for the thrill of a billionaire or lunar eclipse. Her thoughts are an index of topics memorized for conversational luncheons, notes on the atmosphere and the end of a tumultuous and consequential decade. These things wander her mind out of place, like non-native birds drifting in from the sea. We still have time to tell the story of the last, she begins, but is interrupted by the immeasurable speed at which love can strike. It flies over town like a passing comet, bystanders falling to their knees on the sidewalk below. Cries of awe echo through the streets, ricocheting between buildings as if the shards of a fallen meteor. But there are still those who avert their eyes. We have lost our ability to capture information, says the billionaire, peering through the blinds as a lovesick eagle falls past his window. The train approaches, a child or two hanging tight to its roof. The last thought to race through the damsel's head is of the first human to set foot on the moon, bounding like a kangaroo through the low lunar gravity. His shadow falls over craters still seen with the naked eye, a single flag fluttering in the celestial wind around him. That moment may turn out to be the pinnacle of humanity's achievement, says the billionaire, recalling the same image from the place where he stands, knowing that success is bound irrevocably to the rubble in its wake. The billionaire's window glows blue through the evening, all lights but the television gone from the room. Sometimes I feel like I'm not sure I have the ability, if I've ever really, truly loved anyone, or if I've ever really been loved, says a voice on the screen, where two people lay in bed playing out the last scene of a marriage. In the original, it is the woman who says this. In the remake, it is the man. The train turns the bend and continues on in blind orbit, jolting over whatever it must. Okay, I'm going to read two more. Continuing on the celestial moon space theme. This one is called The Land is Dark. There is no one on the ship. It flies without an operator, whirring through space at an unthinkable velocity, like a dagger thrown at a magician's assistant tied to a wall. Rocks float by the windows of the spacecraft, unseen. No one manning the control board to marvel at the intergalactic sights. No lonely person wrapped in silver eating dehydrated ice cream out of a pouch in fear of not returning home. No wife on the ground looking up at the sky. After hibernating for 2 years in the vast studded ether, chasing the orbit of an astral body, the vessel is poised to meet its mark. On the monitors, beneath a radius of blinking red lines strewn with numbers and coordinates, the comet's body is shaped like a rubber duck. It is merely a blob that moves across the screen, a tiny encapsulated landscape, so far away that even at its brightest, it isn't visible to the naked eye. The first time a meteor was reported to be seen, it was observed on the northern part of what was once called the heavens, a strange bluish light that appeared through the mist of the late evening and then grew into a blaze that moved across the sky. A small crowd of aristocrats saw it from where they stood on the terrace, stargazing in powdered wigs and pale translucent dresses. They huddled together at the edge of the veranda, a mole twitching above an upper lip, a triangular captain's hat slightly askew, their shadows cast out long behind them as though they were a single creature. It was a clear, dry summer night, spent in leisure at the castle, the lute player standing by in his pointed shoes and an infinity of cypress trees neatly ordered into the distance. Then came a flash of the first blue embers, as a golden fissure tore open in the clouds, revealing 2 lights, one moving, one still. "Look up at the sky," one of the gentlemen called out, as the harpoon of light ascended the horizon, shooting in an oblique direction towards the east. They say it passed over the North Sea, through eastern Scotland and the English Channel, traveling over 1,000 miles before it landed. As the meteor flashed over the landscape, for a moment, every object appeared suddenly distinct. Its light was prodigious, the gentleman on the veranda later recalled. In that beautiful prospect before the terrace, the whole face of the country was instantly illuminated. One could see the rabbits in their holes at the foot of the trees, the golden pears hanging from the branches, the knave in his pantaloons stealing through the wood with a hen under his arm. But there was never any word of the pile of gold rubble that remained when the light fell to the ground, what ruined house lay in shambles, oozing with ultraviolet, What crater in the barren field glowing with astral debris? Now, in a world with the capacity to land on stars, the empty ship plummets through time towards the comet. On a night in November in the year of the horse, it lands on the comet's surface. The scent of rotten eggs and wood alcohol is heavy on the air, poisonous and causing blindness. The land is dark, twisting with deep coves of molten goo, dust and gas shooting from the ground, rising up to obscure the sunlight. The breathtaking view isn't seen by anyone but the scientists gathered around the monitors light years away, a salad of wires cascading from the enormous headphones. They hoped the device would last through the spring, collecting photographic messages of the terrain until it became too hot. But after 10 years of meticulous travel, slingshotting past the Earth at ever faster speeds towards a moving target, the apparatus misses its mark. The ship lands in a pocket of shadow where solar arrays cannot produce enough power for it to survive. It sinks halfway down into the mud, with one antenna eye sticking up from the surface. Before being blinded by the dust of a magnetic wind, the apparatus takes a single picture. The information loads slowly onto the screens of the monitors until pixel by pixel, the image appears, a figure standing on a ridge in the distance. That was from an article that was about a real spaceship that was supposed to land on a comet and missed its mark. So, okay, this is the last story. This one is called "The Prairie is on Fire." This is also about a real thing. From afar, it looks like a diorama. Wisps of trees quiver like feathers over the hillside. Box-shaped houses fade from their rows. Little figures stand still on the porches and driveways as toy-like vehicles wait at the stoplights. The surrounding land is dotted with tractors. Their shovels rise and fall, digging ever deeper into the hills and causing the ground beneath to give way. All has become captive to a subliminal landscape as fissures in the earth creep across the plains. The town stops abruptly at a soaring edge, positioned above an expanse of caverns, the whole place sliding increasingly down a slope of jutting rock into the mines. Stripes of iron and magnesium blacken the incline as children sit on the rim of the abyss, throwing keepsakes into the darkness, rag dolls and Swiss Army knives, plastic figures tied to parachutes. It is only a matter of time before the town is swallowed up. Over the next 20 years, everything will be moved a few miles down the road, where a new city awaits to be built up from the ground. The houses will be demolished or rolled away on wheels. The famous church will be disassembled and put back together again, the villagers holding pieces of it in their hands as they head over the hill in a great procession into the distance. If there were a time-lapse sequence capturing the metamorphosis, everything would appear in upheaval and motion, like an opera set being put up and broken down. But in real time, here, everything seems still. A sense of waiting for something is tangible in the air. The villagers hold off on buying houses and having children. They wait to open businesses and resist the urge to redecorate, etc. The architects meet to discuss their designs, knowing the dilemma has exceeded structure and become existential. How can we determine the value of a house in a place that doesn't even exist, says one of them, suddenly feeling part of a utopian experiment. They hope to transfer as much of the old city as possible, but they can't move everything. Memories of the place cannot be translated. No surplus of precious metals can reinstate the benches where love was made in the parks, or the rooms of hospitals where babies were born, floating in towers of artificial light, soon to be absorbed into the dust of the caverns. It is summer. The town is close enough to the Arctic Circle to be in a state of perpetual daylight, echoing the constant darkness of the winters. The district, only a cluster of roofs covered with snowfall most of the year. But now, in the heat, Young girls look up at the moon in the middle of the day, only imagining the shadows it casts on their faces. In the new town, all the quandaries of youth will remain. There will still be a midnight sun, and the virgins will stand on the cliffs as they would in any place, still looking for the edge of something, wanting to begin. Thanks.
Does anybody have any questions? Burning questions?
Well, I do.
Only burning.
Yes, I do, but I don't know. Not if you don't want to answer.
Oh, sure. I'm back.
You've been talking about the constraints that you impose on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering how extensive those constraints are. I mean, you seem to have used the jumping off places rather than really constraints.
So it changed over time. Like I said, the idea of this book started like 20 years ago almost. So over time I would go back and do them as exercises, but they began as much stricter. The earlier stories are shorter and they're much stricter about the constraint, and I really don't veer out of that at all or use any other words. But then over time it evolved, and I would say, most of the words would be from the articles I was pulling from, and then sometimes I would use images that were in the newspaper. Like it wouldn't be taking a word, but it would be taking an image that was in a picture in the newspaper, for instance, and other things in the news, basically. But yes, I definitely break some of my own rules.
Great.
Yeah, you can break your own rules. Do it.
No.
I was just wondering how the collaboration with John developed.
Yeah, I guess I can kind of show here. There is sort of, every few stories there's an image by this photographer, John Davola, who's a California photographer who's sort of known for photographs of like derelict buildings and vacant houses. And he had a series called Zuma. Zuma Beach is an area in California where I'm also from. And he would go inside of these houses and take pictures mostly of looking out onto the coast from inside these houses through windows. And then he has this other series called Vandalism, which most of these photographs come from, where he would go inside vacant buildings and kind of do one thing to the space to manipulate the space, like throw a plastic bag up in the air or make one mark on a wall and photograph it. And that was a body of work that existed already. And then I had this project that I was working on, and when I came to compile it as a book, the editor at Tenement Press had worked with this photographer before. And I had always thought that this would work well with images, but I'd always sort of thought collage would be the thing because these are sort of like word collages. And so the editor really made the connection and thought that it would pair well with the images. So it's not a collaboration in the sense that we were working on this project together, but we had these parallel series that spoke to each other, and we really wanted to make it not be that there were illustrations of the stories, but rather accompanying images where the texts are really the main part of the book. And there was a cool connection that I was also from California, and there's sort of a derelict aspect to a lot of the stories. So, yeah. Yes?
I was wondering, because the way you approach writing is so cool and unique to me. What does the writing or your writing process or routine look like for you?
Sure, yeah. This is the only project I've really done that works with constraint in this kind of more formal way, although all writing kind of has a constraint to it. You know, writing a novel with a certain POV is a constraint in itself. But yeah, I work a lot from images. I start with images and scenes that come to me. I'm primarily a fiction writer, I would say, but my work really veers a lot into poetry too. And this is really one of the more hybrid projects I've done. I'm currently working on a novel that James mentioned. It's also sort of experimental in that it's not plot driven in the way that more traditional novels tend to be. But yeah, I mean, my process involves a lot of times sitting alone in a room and trying to make something out of nothing, which is the task of writing, no matter where you are with it. You know, whether you're famous and have written a million books, you still have to sit in front of an empty screen and make something magically materialize out of nothing. And I think that's a lot of where the work of being a writer is being willing to sit there. And even if you're not getting a lot of words on the page, it's the devotion to doing that and, you know, waiting for the words to come, because eventually they will. It might be many days of no words. So I hear laughs, I hear laughter over here. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which of the drawings you presented in your masterclass today would you describe this new novel as? What's the closest?
I think I'm more like wavelets, many, yeah. For people who didn't come to the class, I was talking about how the most traditional arc of telling a story tends to be like one wave, where it's a build up to a crescendo and then a release of that. And then I sort of talked about other shapes that a story can take. And I think my work mostly has lots of waves, not just one big wave. So, yeah, Dan.
For this collection, I was actually thinking about the sequencing, and I was wondering if you had similar thoughts about the shape of the book as a whole in terms of one of those images or some other sort of organizing principle.
Yeah, so I never really thought of this as a book. It was more like an experiment I would do on the side between things, and they accumulated over time. So the way that they appear in this book are not in the chronological order that I wrote them in. And the only thing that really connects them is the technique and they do sort of all feel like they're part of a certain world. And there's some characters that come up in more than one. There are callbacks and some characters that come up in more than one story. I had the beginning and the end were real bookends, but everything in between, because I'm not building a story, I'm sort of building a world. It was really hard to decide what order to put them in. I think it probably was similar to the process of someone deciding how to organize a book of poems that aren't just one long poem. So yeah, I mean, I just tried to make it, not too many that are in the same tone in a row, not too many of the same character right next to each other, not too many about moons right next to each other. I realized how many of the same word I would use a million times. So yeah, it was a tough, organizing them was a really tough process.
You just described it as like a process of exclusion. Like, this can't be next to this, so there's going to open up space,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right.
Thanks, Kyra.
Yeah, thanks to you guys.
Just brought them in tote bags.
Do we want to announce if there are things to look at?
Yeah. Oh,
I also have copies of my book.
Yeah.
Sydney's teaching right
There are copies of Kyra's book that are available for perusal and purchase, and you can check out the pop-up shops, which still exist, if you want to see some of her editorial work.
now.